a subscription. Oh yeah, you do have to have a subscription as well to Max, don't you? But you can just get a subscription and then cancel it after you watch it. That's one way to do it. California wildfires. Share screen. Make it big. All right, there we go. That's what's going on, folks. I do have VPN subscription, can't access it. So you've got to tell your VPN that you're in America and then go to Max and you've got to sign up for Max. Yeah. All right, so there's the fires. Absolutely horrific. You know, this is the biggest one. There's always fires in California, and there's some in Arizona as well to a lesser extent. So when I was in Arizona from 91 to, what was it, 2017? No, 2007, 91, 2016 years. Then I would always see on the headline news the fires in California. Anyway, I was housed in the same building in the maximum security Madison Street jail as Leonard Gregg. And here's a BBC story from 2002. Firefighter charged over Arizona blaze. A man was arrested in Arizona for allegedly starting one of the two forest fires that eventually merged into a massive blaze that has forced thousands to flee their homes. Leonard Gregg, 29, is a contract firefighter for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, who allegedly started the blaze because he wanted some seasonal work, prosecutors said. Appearing in court in Flagstaff, Arizona, Mr. Gregg was charged with 2 counts of willfully and without authority setting fire to timber, said U.S. District Magistrate Stephen Verkamp. Each charge carries a possible jail sentence of 5 years and a fine of up to $250,000. Mr. Gregg is accused of starting what was originally called the Rodeo Fire, which merged with another blaze to form the biggest fire in Arizona history. By Saturday, it ripped through 180,000 hectares, 452,000 acres, destroying more than 400 homes and forcing more than 30,000 people to flee. The announcement of the arrest was made in Show Low, a small town that firefighters were able to spur from the flames as the residents returned to their homes, but the blaze was still burning out of control. The fire crews were working hard to save the community of Forest Lakes, 55 km from Show Low. We're still dealing with a huge monster, fire crew spokesman Jim Paxson said. The latest battleground in a local highway, State Route 260. Fire officials fear that if the blaze is able to jump the road, it will expand rapidly through a pine forest. President George Bush visited the region last week before heading to Canada for the G8 summit and declared a major disaster in the area, freeing up federal recovery funds. Other fires in the US all continue to burn, Colorado, etc. All right, anyway, you get the picture. The media said that Leonard Gregg had started the biggest fire in the history of Arizona because he was a firefighter and he wanted to create work for himself. Sounds a bit like these lawyers, doesn't it? Creating work for themselves. Now, I spoke to Leonard Gregg in the maximum security Madison Street jail around 2003, 2004. And Leonard Gregg was a survivor of fetal alcohol syndrome. It's one of the first times I'd heard about it. I read his paperwork, and his mum drank and abused her body, and that affected his ability to think properly. And basically, Leonard Gregg was so slow he didn't know what the hell was going on with his case. And that's why he asked me to read his paperwork. And when I read his paperwork and I looked at the news headlines saying he'd done all this to create work for himself, something was not adding up. So the mainstream media to this day have stuck to this narrative that Leonard Gregg started this fire, when I know for a fact they scared the living daylights out of him, told him he was never going to get out of prison unless he signed for guilt, and he would do about a 10-year sentence to take the wrath of the public. Now, why would they manipulate a mentally ill man, slow in the brain, a survivor of fetal alcohol syndrome, into guilt? Telling him, sign here, we'll only give you 10 years, admit guilt, go to trial and lose, you will never get out. And poor Leonard Gregg was terrified he would never get out, and so he did what his public pretender told him to do. So his public pretender could move on to his or her next victim. Because they have a case quota, and they get paid by the amount of cases they close. So what I'm saying, folks, is when factors come into play and circumstances are created or enabled by politicians, such as the grooming gangs in the UK, who I learnt last night from Gemma, have 200,000 victims. Well, all these bloody politicians were so woke and scared to do anything about it because all they cared about was the way they were perceived in certain communities. Hundreds of thousands of British teenagers got R-worded and SA'd by grooming gangs. If you've missed Gemma's part 2 last night, she is so emotional. It's just heartbreaking. And I would start with Gemma's part 1. It's called Grooming Gang Horror Story. She gets into the details. It's graphic content warning, but she's one of the most powerful, charismatic, emotional speakers we have ever had on this channel. She's an absolute spiritual warrior. So, what these phony politicians do to lay the frameworks for natural disasters to be exacerbated or for grooming gang members not to be incarcerated, the mainstream media goes along with these phonies and reports whatever garbage they want us to hear. And when that fire was raging in Arizona, and poor old Leonard Gregg was my neighbor, and he was crying because he thought he was never going out of prison. He didn't even know what he'd done wrong. He was just slow of the brain, fetal alcohol syndrome. And all the headlines were saying he was this wicked man who had lit this fire. So all the public hatred poured down upon Leonard Gregg, this evil firefighter creating work for himself, when really there were insidious characters behind the scenes manipulating this mainstream media narrative so that blame would not be redirected in other directions. And with the California fires right now that we are seeing, blame started to rain down upon the lady in charge of the fire budget for her budget cuts and for sending water to save the fishies. Blame has been raining down upon the Kardashians. Put in, if you look, where is it? Kardashians. Water hoarders. Kardashians have been known as the worst water wasters in California for years. For years. If we go back to New York Post 2022, they are listed as a number of stars, the worst water wasters in swanky California neighborhoods amid unprecedented drought restrictions. 3 of their multi-million-dollar properties were among those issued notices of exceedance by the Las Virgenes Municipal Water District, indicating they had surpassed 150% of their monthly water allowance at least 4 times since a drought emergency was declared late last year, according to records obtained by the LA Times. It leaves them potentially subject to flow restrictor devices, which would drastically reduce the amount of water they could get to waste. Other stars on the list of wasteful water residents in the swanky Calabasas and Hidden Hills neighborhoods include Kevin Hart and Sylvester Stallone. But the most wasteful was former NBA star Dwayne Wade and his actress wife, Gabrielle Union, who used 90,000 gallons more than they were supposed to in June 2020, more than 1,400% of that month's allowance. Even worse, in May, they used a staggering 489,000 gallons more than they were allowed, more than any other customer that month, the LA paper said. They blamed the problem with their swimming pool, telling the LA Times that they've since taken drastic steps to reduce water usage in accordance with the new city guidelines and have since moved into their home. We have been doing everything we can to rectify the situation and will continue to go to extensive lengths to resolve the issue, they insisted. All right, that, folks, is from 2000 and 2 years ago. But if you look at 2 days ago, this is how the stage is set for these disasters. Anger over wasteful, entitled Hollywood stars includes Kim Kardashian, who broke water-saving rules to tend their huge gardens before fire hydrants ran dry as the inferno struck. So 2 years ago, these celebs were outed as the most wasteful with their water, and they didn't make any amends whatsoever. We can all have droplets. They're going to eat their cake. Fury has grown, though, now because of these fires. The strict water conserving measures were in place since 2022. Like I said, there was stuff hitting then. With ordinary residents restricted to watering their gardens twice a week for 8 minutes at a time. Ms. Kardashian, as in Kim, who lives in a $60 million house in the Oaks, an exclusive gated community near the epicenter of one of this week's fires, was fined by city authorities that year for using 232,000 gallons of water more than her allocation. And Stallone and Kevin Hart were also fined. Kardashians have said they've installed water-saving measures. But a neighbor of Kim told the Mail, these celebs have a sense of entitlement. Everyone was told to cut back on water precisely for this situation, to preserve it to fight fires. They carried on watering because they could afford the fines. Anger was growing at these people hiring private firefighters for $2,000 an hour to protect their properties. Chris Dunn, owner of Covered Six, which provides services to Hollywood's elite, said, "My phone has been ringing off the hook. Demand has never been higher." A wealthy source said, "This week's events have shown you can't trust the city to protect your property. I have the money, so why not? And it comes as residents of Mandeville Canyon and Brentwood trying to flee to safety. Palisades fire engulfing multi-million-dollar homes. Footage showing houses ablaze in the canyon. Like you can see on the screen, massive clouds of smoke. Thousands of residents in LA evacuated. Multiple drivers on Sunset reporting being stuck in gridlock. Distressed woman stuck in unmoving traffic for 2 hours while heading towards a fire station to drop off donated goods for firefighters. Quote, there was a visibility when I first got here, a little bit of blue sky, and it has unfolded to absolute ugliness, she said. Firefighters and helicopters were seen circling the area and making water drops as the 22,660 acre fire continues to spread. Hellish flames. I think it's in the 20s now, the amount of people who tragically died. Burning 40,000 acres of land, destroying over 10,000 structures, over a dozen people missing, 153 residents under evacuation orders, 57,000 more structures at risk. Good Samaritan added that while standing still on the road, she offered a place to stay to a woman in the car ahead who was forced to evacuate. It's very unfortunate that it takes something like this to bring everybody together. Hopefully this will continue even after this, she told the publication. Wow. So as you can see on the screen, absolute chaos. And the 6 fires burning. Wow. James says, I pray this nightmare ends soon. So many prayers. He purchased his lavish Brentwood pad in 2017 for $23 million. Schwarzenegger's Brentwood mansion under threat. LA County public health order. Fires have degraded the air quality, which poses immediate and long-term risk to public health. Airplanes dropping fire retardant in Mandeville Canyon, aiming to create a defensive barrier around homes. Feds remain on the lookout for fire starters. So, we've got brave firemen coming from surrounding states. We've got brave firemen coming from Mexico to help the situation. And people were saying that the fires are to destroy evidence. What do you guys think in the chat? Are these LA fires destroying evidence? Let me see. LA fires. Live coverage. Region. All right, so the latest news on the fires is the region is bracing for dangerous winds as the death toll rises to 24. That was 2 hours ago. Let me just see. Has anything else come out in the last hour? Last hour. Australian killed in LA fires. That's 14 minutes ago. A strange pink powder being used to fight fires in California 16 minutes ago. Red flag warnings issued for dangerous winds. Arson suspect detained as blaze continues. I told you they would get an arson suspect. Is this guy going to be the Leonard Gregg of the California fires to take the heat off the phony politicians? We will see. Heavy gusts predicted for later today threaten the progress the firefighters are making against the blazes, destroying thousands of homes. So Palisades fire is 14% contained presently. Eaton fire is 33% contained. It's slowed, but it still covers 14,000 acres. Palisades has burned over 23,700 acres and is still threatening residences. Kenneth, 1,000 acres is contained. Hearst, 89% contained. Lydia, 400 acres, 100% contained.